A man disappears. All that's left behind is his voice captured on a reel spinning alone in the dark. In a quiet office overlooking San Francisco Bay, a stack of tapes sits in silent formation, each one labeled with numbers, each one carrying the voice of David Norliss, a journalist who began investigating the unexplained and then never came back. His final instruction? Play the tapes. Listen to what I found. Released in 1973, the Norliss Tapes wasn't just another TV horror movie. It was a pilot, a doorway to a larger story that was never told. Directed by Dan Curtis, the same mind behind Dark Shadows and Trilogy of Terror, it dared to blend investigative journalism, ancient rituals, and supernatural resurrection, long before any network was ready to handle it. With a tone that veered between news broadcast and nightmare, the film stitched together elements that felt more found than fictional, and when it was over, it didn't end. It stopped, abruptly, leaving more questions than answers, and a mythos that would grow in whispers over the decades. The series it was meant to launch never aired. Some say the cost was too high, others say it hit too close to something real. But those tapes, fictional or not, still haunt those who've heard them. These are 20 weird facts you didn't know about. The Norliss Tapes, 1973. Fact 1. The story was based on a real-life disappearance. The film opens in silence, broken only by a phone call that leads to a missing man and a stack of eerie tape recordings. But this wasn't just a fictional device. The premise, a journalist investigating the occult who vanishes without a trace, was reportedly inspired by a real case from Los Angeles in the late 60 seconds. That reporter had been researching fringe cults and vanished mid-investigation, leaving only boxes of notes and incomplete audio. Dan Curtis and screenwriter William F. Nolan reimagined this case as the backbone of the Norliss Tapes, grounding their supernatural thriller in something disturbingly plausible. Roy Thinnis, who voiced Norliss, recorded his narration separately and early in production. His voice was intentionally processed to sound degraded. They ran it through old tape machines to simulate decay, adding a layer of authenticity that confused early audiences. Some thought they were hearing actual archival audio. NBC had to clarify that all voices were scripted. Still, something about Norliss's tone, weary, flat, and too specific, felt like a man documenting his own descent. And maybe that's because the story came from someone who really vanished. Fact 2. The original actress walked off set after hearing the tape. In the first few minutes, Norliss's editor listens to the beginning of the first tape, his voice slow, methodical, unnerving. It was supposed to be just a basic reaction shot. But what happened during casting was far stranger. Actress Angie Dickinson was initially brought in to play the editor, but after hearing the playback during rehearsals, she allegedly turned pale and abruptly left the set. Crew members say she kept repeating, "That voice, I know that voice." She never returned. Official statements blamed scheduling issues, but whispers circulated that she believed the voice matched someone who had stalked her in the past, a man whose whereabouts remained unknown. Production quickly recast the role with Michelle Carey and reshot the sequences. All existing footage with Dickinson was quietly destroyed, and no promotional material ever mentioned her. Carey would later reveal that even she felt something was off. "I wasn't sure I was acting, I was reacting. There was something in the room with that voice. Maybe it was just a performance. Maybe something or someone was listening back." Fact 3. The sculptures were made from contaminated materials. One of the most unsettling visuals in the Norliss Tapes is the collection of grotesque sculptures left behind by James Court. Inhuman faces, stretched mouths, sunken sockets, more disturbing than anything the low-budget production had attempted before. To achieve this, the props department sourced clay from an old ceramics factory in Marin County, a site rumored among locals to have a bad history. Not long after the sculptures arrived, multiple crew members reported skin irritation, headaches, and a strange smell coming from the figures once they dried. A later analysis found traces of organic compounds, including bone meal and unidentified animal proteins. The supplier refused to say who had placed the order for that batch, claiming only that it was requested for performance art years earlier. The production kept the sculptures, but handled them with gloves. At night, some crews swore the eyes appeared to have shifted. Others refused to go near the props at all. The film's plot describes the artist using experimental materials. They just didn't expect it to be that literal. Fact 4. The mansion in the film was a real asylum with a history. The sprawling estate where Ellen Court resides plays a central role in the film, a looming presence that almost feels sentient. But it wasn't a studio build, it was an actual structure with its own disturbing past. Located north of San Francisco, the house used for exterior shots was once part of the now-defunct Belmont Hills Sanitarium, shut down in the 1950 seconds after multiple investigations into mistreatment. Production chose it for its decaying grandeur, but soon ran into technical issues. Microphones crackled, footage developed with unexplained shadows, and lights flickered during key shots, particularly around the basement doors. An audio tech later claimed one of his reels picked up something unintelligible, a whispering, in a low frequency no one spoke in. When the show aired, several viewers sent letters claiming the house looked familiar, not from memory, but from recurring nightmares. And most chilling of all? Some describe details never shown on screen, like the red staircase in the East Wing, which, according to production records, actually existed. Fact 5. A photo used in the film captured something extra. In one scene, Ellen Court shows Norliss a photograph of her supposedly dead husband taken after his funeral. It's a disturbing moment that sets the tone for the rest of the film. But behind the scenes, the image was never supposed to look the way it did. The original plan was to use a doctored photo with a blurry figure, but the actual instant Polaroid taken on set revealed a second presence, a tall, vaguely human shape in the background, warped and partly obscured by light. Dan Curtis reportedly kept the photo and insisted on reshooting the scene from a new angle. The first version was destroyed, or so the crew believed. Yet in the late 1980 seconds, a horror fanzine claimed to have received an anonymous envelope containing what they described as an image NBC didn't want aired. The magazine never published it. And the envelope? It vanished from their archives soon after. Fact 6. The undead's voice came from someone nobody hired. When the reanimated James Court speaks, it's in a voice that doesn't sound human, deep, gurgling, not quite of this world. That performance is unforgettable. But the voice itself doesn't belong to the actor on screen. The original audio by actor Nick Dimitri was deemed too clear, so Dan Curtis held a secret ADR session late at night, reportedly bringing in someone referred to only as Mr. D. No casting call was issued, no contract signed. One technician described the man as pale, silent, and unsettlingly calm. He entered the booth, recorded the lines in a single take, and walked out without saying a word. No one saw him again. When NBC later attempted to remaster the film, they found that the vocal track couldn't be isolated, as if it had fused into the ambient mix itself. Dan Curtis, when asked about it years later, only smiled and said, "Sometimes the voice finds you." Fact 7. A real funeral collided with a fake one on set. One of the film's most atmospheric moments is Norliss's visit to the cemetery, where he suspects James Court's grave may be empty. The fog-laced visuals and hollow silence give the sequence an unsettling realism, and that's no accident. The scene was shot at an operational graveyard in Sonoma County during pre-dawn hours, selected for its eerie layout and minimal foot traffic. But on the morning of filming, the crew arrived to find that a real burial service had been scheduled by mistake for the exact same time slot. Out of respect, production was halted. But the coincidence didn't stop there. The name on the real tombstone? Court. Cast and crew were visibly rattled. And while no footage was captured during the real service, one boom mic left recording picked up a woman's voice in the background whispering, "He's still waiting." That audio was never used. But it was enough to make the camera operator refuse to film any close-ups near that grave. Fact 8. The morgue drawer opened on its own repeatedly. Later in the film, Norliss visits the morgue, hoping to confirm whether James Court's body ever made it there. What was meant to be a straightforward scene became one of the most frustrating and creepiest parts of the shoot. The set was a real abandoned hospital basement retrofitted for filming. While prepping a shot, the crew noticed that drawer #4, the one labeled Court, kept sliding open slowly, even after being latched shut multiple times. They checked the tracks, balanced the angles, even sealed it with tape. Still, it would creep open, particularly whenever the word resurrected was mentioned during rehearsal. At first, they laughed it off. Then, during a take, all the lights cut out simultaneously, leaving the set in pitch-black silence. Dan Curtis insisted it added realism and told them to keep rolling, but several team members refused to return to that location for pickups, including the lighting assistant, who quit the next day. Fact 9. The ritual book in the film was the real thing. At one point in the story, Norliss finds an ancient-looking volume inside the Court home, filled with cryptic drawings and rituals involving blood, resurrection, and darkness. It wasn't just for show. Dan Curtis rejected the prop department's mock-up, calling it too clean. Instead, he sourced a real 19th century grimoire from a rare book collector in Los Angeles, reportedly an untranslated edition of the Livre Noir. The book's text, mostly in Latin and Old French, included references to necromantic rites and lunar ceremonies. A professor hired to translate it quit after 3 pages, writing in his report, "This isn't theatrical, this is operative." For safety, the crew stored the book in a locked case between takes. But 2 days before wrap, it vanished. No signs of a break-in, nothing else missing, just the book. Curtis never addressed it publicly. And the collector? He claimed he never got it back. Fact 10. Michaela Carey sleepwalked into a scene she didn't remember. In a brief but haunting sequence, Ellen Court walks through her dimly lit home at night, her expression blank, her steps slow and trance-like. The footage feels strangely authentic because it wasn't in the script. Crew members reported seeing actress Michelle Carey wandering the set between takes, barefoot and whispering fragments of lines that hadn't been rehearsed. The cinematographer began rolling, assuming she was improvising a new approach to the character. When the footage was reviewed later, Dan Curtis was stunned by the rawness of the moment and decided to include it. Carey, however, claimed she had no memory of filming that particular scene. In a later interview, she recalled, "I just remember waking up in my dressing room, still wearing the nightgown." Audio engineers who enhanced the tape noticed something odd in her whispering phrases in what appeared to be classical Latin, none of which had been part of the original lines. There was no Latin dialogue in the script, and Carey, by her own admission, never studied it. Fact 11. A fire broke out while filming and they kept the footage. One of the film's most beautiful shots shows Ellen walking down a hallway in a white nightgown, holding a candelabra. The lighting is natural, flickering, and deeply atmospheric. But that same lighting nearly derailed the entire shoot. To achieve an authentic look, Dan Curtis opted to light the scene using only real candles. No artificial fill lights, no controlled sources, just open flame. On the 6th take, a loose sleeve of Carey's vintage gown caught fire after brushing too close to the flame. A nearby crew member extinguished it within seconds, but Carey suffered light burns, and the gown was destroyed. Filming paused for 2 days. A replacement dress was made using fireproof materials, but in post-production, Curtis made a bold decision. He used the 5th take, the one right before the accident, because, in his words, the flames danced like they knew something was coming. And in the background of that shot, barely visible for half a second, stands a shadowy shape that no one on set ever recalled blocking. Fact 12. The monster's face was too horrific for television. When James Court, reanimated and no longer fully human, finally appears on screen, his face remains mostly in shadow. That wasn't a stylistic flourish, it was a network mandate. The prosthetics created for the undead Court were intensely detailed, showing exposed tendons, torn skin, and a partially decomposed jawline. NBC executives found the effect grotesque beyond acceptable limits and demanded that the creature be shown only in silhouette or dim lighting. Dan Curtis fought to preserve more of the makeup design, but ultimately relented after the Standards and Practices team threatened to pull the broadcast. As a result, the character was never shown in full light, and the most detailed footage of Court's face ordered destroyed. Actor Nick Dimitri later shared a cryptic comment. "Wearing that makeup, it didn't feel like a costume. It felt like I was returning to something I'd already been." The design team never reconstructed it, and no photos of the full prosthetic remain in the studio archives. Fact 13. The ritual chamber was filmed in a cellar with a troubled past. In a climactic moment, Norliss uncovers a hidden chamber beneath the Court estate, a place lined with symbols, lit by fire, and stained by something darker. That set was no fabrication. The production filmed those scenes inside a real wine cellar beneath a 19th century inn outside Sausalito. The location was chosen for its natural decay and Gothic layout, but once inside, the crew found animal bones arranged in geometric patterns, tucked into alcoves, and behind rusted shelves. The owners insisted the cellar had been sealed for years. No one had entered. Rather than remove the bones, Dan Curtis instructed the art team to leave everything untouched and simply build around it. Stranger still, every time they tried to light the scene with candles, the flames extinguished within minutes. Electric lighting had to be brought in just to finish the shoot, and during one take, the sound recorder captured what a technician described as chanting that wasn't coming from anyone on set. Fact 14. The blood used wasn't movie blood, and no one would say what it was. In the ritual scene, thick, dark liquid is poured into a bowl carved with symbols. The effect is disturbingly lifelike. That's because what they used wasn't the standard corn syrup blend. The initial fake blood didn't look convincing on camera, especially under low, flickering light. So the special effects team introduced a new mix. One they refused to detail, labeling it only Organic Compound C. Those who handled it said it smelled metallic like rust or raw meat. One wardrobe assistant said it coagulated overnight, requiring the bowl to be scrubbed clean each morning. Dan Curtis liked the results so much that he ordered it used in every close-up. But after filming Wrapped, the original bowl cracked in two without being dropped and dried completely clean inside, despite no one emptying it. When asked in later years what the compound was made from, a prop assistant said simply, "Don't ask, just be glad it didn't get on your skin." Fact 15. The gemstone was real, and it's still missing. Throughout the movie, James Court clutches a small gemstone, blue-green and glowing faintly under certain lighting. In the script, it's described as an ancient power focus. In reality, it was something much harder to explain. Instead of creating a resin replica, someone brought in a real mineral from a collector in the Bay Area, either labradorite or a rare fluorite variant, both of which shimmer under specific light conditions. No documentation was filed, no rental agreement signed. The stone simply arrived in a box marked, "Do not lose." But after production ended, the stone was gone. It wasn't packed with the props. It didn't appear in any of the final continuity shots. Some believe it was pocketed by a curious crew member. Others think Dan Curtis kept it. But one assistant on set claimed something stranger. "We checked the prop table during cleanup. The cushion it sat on was burned straight through." To this day, the original gemstone has never resurfaced, and no one has ever claimed ownership. Fact 16. The chase scene was filmed without a script or warnings. One of the most gripping sequences in the Norliss tapes is a chaotic chase through the woods, with Norliss fleeing from something or someone not entirely visible. The intensity of that scene wasn't staged. It was created through sheer unpredictability. Dan Curtis wanted fear that couldn't be faked, so he instructed Roy Thins, who played Norliss, to begin running when he heard a scream and to not stop until someone yelled, "Cut." Thinnis wasn't told where his pursuer would appear or how close they'd get. The creature actor, in full prosthetics, was also given freedom to improvise. The result was a disorienting, almost documentary-style sprint. At one point, Thins tripped on exposed roots and twisted his ankle, but kept running. That take made it into the final cut. The camera crew could barely keep up. One segment where Court drops from a tree limb was cut entirely due to its intensity, but those who saw the raw footage say it didn't feel like a performance. It felt like a man being hunted. Fact 17. The house fire was real and nearly went out of control. In the final act, Norliss returns to the Court home, just as flames consume it, a symbolic cleansing of everything left behind. What looks like a special effect was anything but. The production had obtained permission to burn down an old condemned house. Fire crews were on standby. Explosives were rigged to control the burn pattern. But once the fire was lit, it moved far faster than expected. Within seconds, the flames reached the roof and began melting equipment cables. The second camera crew was unable to capture their shots. They had to abandon their station as the heat grew too intense. Only one full-angle shot survived, a single take from a fixed tripod. That's what you see in the film. And just before the flames reach the second floor, a figure appears in the windowsill, unmoving, backlit by fire. No one was assigned to that part of the house, and the studio logs list no additional extras. To this day, no explanation has ever been given. Fact 18. The final tape wasn't silent, not entirely. The last moments of the film are abrupt. Norliss's voice trails off mid-thought. The screen fades to black. End of story. But in the original master tape, there's something else. Technicians working with the raw audio discovered a few seconds of strange noise after the spoken narration ends. It wasn't static. It wasn't room tone. It sounded like breathing, heavy, uneven, mechanical, followed by a faint rhythmic clicking. The engineers reversed it, slowed it down. When isolated, the sound resembled a chant or possibly a countdown in another language. NBC removed those final seconds from the broadcast version, citing irrelevant audio clutter. But Dan Curtis kept a private copy, and when asked years later if the sound was deliberate, he said, "It came with the reel. We didn't add anything." That master tape was never archived properly, and when the studio was bought out, it vanished completely. Fact 19. A newspaper prop connected Norliss to another Dan Curtis universe. For years, the Norliss Tapes was seen as a one-off, a failed pilot with no clear ties to Dan Curtis's larger body of work. But in 1993, a horror archivist noticed something buried in plain sight. In one segment of Trilogy of Terror, another Curtis film, a newspaper briefly appears on a table. The headline, out of focus, reads, "Reporter disappears amidst occult inquiry," and the photograph? Fuzzy, but unmistakably similar to Roy Thin's. The prop had gone unnoticed for decades. When enhanced, the article snippet even includes the word Norliss and references to unreleased tapes. Was this a hidden link, a retroactive Easter egg, or proof that Curtis always intended to revisit the Norliss mythos? He never commented. The prop master for Trilogy of Terror later said in an interview, "We were told to include that paper, that's all I can say." It's possible that Norliss was never forgotten, just shelved, waiting to be found. Fact 20. The show was ready to launch, then silenced overnight. At the time of its broadcast, the Norliss Tapes was poised to become a weekly series. Scripts had been outlined, actors were on standby, promotional materials were drafted. Then, without public explanation, NBC pulled the plug. The official line was budget concerns. But memos later leaked from within the network painted a different picture. Executives had received letters from religious organizations warning that the show's content, particularly its use of real symbols and spoken incantations, was not fictional enough. One letter stated, "You are not airing entertainment, you are invoking." One internal NBC note even referred to the Norliss Tapes as a security risk. Perhaps most disturbing of all, a sixth script in the pipeline, titled The Mirror Broadcast, allegedly involved a cursed television segment that caused viewers to vanish after watching. The cancellation wasn't about rating, it was about containment. Bonus fact, tape #4 wasn't missing, it was marked "Do Not Play." In the final scene of the Norliss Tapes, we return to the office where the reels were discovered, a quiet room, a desk, and a rack of tapes arranged in order. The last one we hear is tape #3. But if you look closely, there's something off. The tape rack has 14 slots, and while the final tape is clearly marked #3, the slot beside it isn't empty by accident. A closer freeze frame reveals faint handwriting above slot 14. It doesn't say "missing," it doesn't say "lost," it says "Do Not Play." This detail is never addressed in the voiceover. It's not in the script, but someone either on set or behind the scenes added it before filming. Roy Thin's was once asked about it at a convention. He reportedly paused, smiled, and said, "That wasn't part of the prop list, that was Dan." Speculation about tape #4 has fueled fan theories for decades. Was it meant for a sequel? Was it an actual recording, maybe a fragment of the unaired next episode? Or was it just an in-joke from a director who liked to leave breadcrumbs behind? What makes it truly unsettling is this. In several behind-the-scenes continuity photos, there is a reel in slot 14, but in the final cut, it's gone. What if the Norliss Tapes wasn't just lost to time, but was taken? Was it pulled because it was too strange? Or because it wasn't fiction at all? And what do you believe was hidden on tape 14? Leave your theories in the comment. The story might be over, but the mystery isn't.